So back on November 12th, 1996, something unthinkable happened in the skies over India. Two massive passenger jets. They were guided by a single air traffic controller. They had a standard safety margin between them. And yet, they flew directly into one another. This became the deadliest mid-air collision in history. And the big question is, how? How, with all the systems we have in place, could something like this possibly happen? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down.
Yeah, that's the first thing air traffic control heard. It was from a U.S. Air Force pilot who was flying nearby and just saw the impossible. That quote, that orange glow, was the exact moment two radar blips, carrying a total of 349 souls, simply vanished into a fireball over a village called Charki Dodger.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the accident itself. Then, we need to understand the highways in the sky. The rules that are supposed to make collisions impossible. From there, we'll follow the two planes on their fateful path and piece together the final minutes. And finally, we'll get into the investigation, uncover the chain of errors that led to the crash, and talk about the vital safety lessons that, thankfully, came out of this tragedy.
So this is really the heart of the mystery, isn't it? You've got this vast open sky, modern guidance systems, and two planes set on a course to pass each other safely with 1,000 feet of space between them. And yet, they met. How does that happen?
And the human cost was just staggering, absolute. 349 people, every single person on both of those planes died. It is, to this day, the worst mid-air collision the world has ever seen. To even begin to understand how it happened, we first have to get a handle on the invisible system that usually keeps us all so safe up there.
Okay, so let's talk about these highways in the sky. Think about it. Every single minute of every day, thousands of planes are crisscrossing the globe. The reason it's not just chaos up there is because of this highly structured system of routes and rules. It's really just like highways on the ground, but, in 3 dimensions.
And the absolute bedrock of this whole system is something called a flight level. You can think of it as a universal language for altitude. It's so important. When a controller says flight level 140, every pilot in that area knows that means exactly 14,000 feet. No confusion. This standardization is absolutely crucial for keeping planes separated vertically. Now, the system has this simple but kind of brilliant rule baked into it. On any given airway, planes traveling in one direction, let's say eastbound, they fly at odd-numbered altitudes. So 35,000 feet, 37,000 feet, and so on. Planes going the other way, westbound, fly at even altitudes, 34,000, 36,000 feet. Just that simple rule automatically creates thousands of feet of built-in separation. It makes sure planes flying in opposite directions are never, ever supposed to be at the same altitude.
All right, so with that background, let's meet the two aircraft and the people at the very center of this tragedy. They started their days in completely different countries, heading to different destinations, totally unaware that their paths were about to converge in the most devastating way imaginable.
So on one side, we have Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763. This was a massive Boeing 747 with 312 people on board. A lot of them were Indian laborers heading to work in the Gulf. And then we have Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907. It was a Russian-made Ilyushin Il-76, basically a cargo plane, carrying 37 merchants and crew on their way to Delhi.
Here's the critical piece of the puzzle. Even though they had different final destinations, for a really crucial period of time, both planes were funneled onto the exact same narrow air corridor. It's known as the Delhi Star. So you have the Saudi flight climbing out of Delhi on this route, while the Kazakh flight was descending into Delhi on the very same route, just coming from the opposite direction. Everything, literally everything depended on that one controller keeping them at different altitudes.
So now, let's reconstruct those final fatal communications. This is what was said between the two planes and the single air traffic controller, VK Dutta, in the last few minutes before everything went wrong.
Okay, look at the timeline. The instructions seem perfectly logical, right? The Saudi flight is told to climb to 14,000 feet. The Kazakh flight is told to descend to 15,000 feet. At 6:38, the Saudi crew confirms, yep, we're holding at 14,000. Just a minute later, the Kazakh crew reports they've reached their assigned altitude of 15,000 feet. I mean, on paper, this looks perfect. Everything is exactly as it should be.
1,000 feet. That was the plan. That was the official safety gap between them, a standard, totally safe distance. The controller believed one plane was steady at 14,000 feet and the other was steady at 15,000 feet. The problem was, he couldn't actually see what was happening. In the absolute final moments, the controller gives one last warning to the Kazakh flight. He's trying to help them visually spot the oncoming 747. He says, very clearly, traffic is at 8 miles, level 140, 14,000 feet. The Kazakh radio operator acknowledged the message. Seconds later, they collided. So, the investigation that followed had to answer one single question. If one plane was at 14,000 feet and the other reported being at 15,000 feet, how did they hit each other? The answer, as it so often is, was found in the flight data recorder, the black box.
And the flight data recorder revealed this horrifying discrepancy. When the Kazakh radio operator told the controller they were at 15,000 feet, the data showed they were actually at 14,500 feet. And, this is the crucial part, they were still descending. They didn't hold their altitude. They flew right through it, directly into the path of that Saudi 747.
But this wasn't just one mistake. It was a whole tragic chain reaction. The main cause, yes, was the Kazakh pilot's failure to level off. But that was made so much worse by a severe language barrier. The flight crew only spoke Russian, and they were relying on a radio operator to translate these complex English instructions under a lot of pressure. On top of that, the radar system in Delhi was, well, it was primitive. It could show where a plane was, but not its altitude. So the controller was completely blind to the fact that the Kazakh crew was making this fatal mistake. And finally, that 1,000-foot separation, while technically acceptable, left absolutely no room for error.
You know, in the aftermath of such a horrific loss of life, the aviation world was really forced to act. The investigation into the Charki-Dadri collision became a catalyst for massive, global changes in air safety that we all benefit from today.
And the most significant change, by far, was the mandated use of a system called TCAS. The best way to think about TCAS is as a final electronic safety net. It allows the planes to essentially talk to each other, totally independent of air traffic control on the ground.
So here's how it works, in 3 simple steps. First, it constantly scans the sky. If another plane gets a little too close, it gives a calm, verbal warning through the cockpit speakers. Traffic, traffic. But if the planes keep heading for each other and the threat is immediate, the system basically takes command. It will order one plane, climb, climb, and the other plane, descend, descend, automatically coordinating an escape maneuver that a human pilot might not have time to figure out. A system like this would have almost certainly prevented the Charki-Dadri disaster. So really, the legacy of this crash is written in today's safety regulations. TCAS is now mandatory on all large aircraft, strict English proficiency tests were brought in for all international pilots, getting rid of that dangerous translation delay, and crucially, airports all over the world were required to upgrade to secondary radar systems, the kind that show controllers not just a plane's position, but also its vital altitude information.
So this isn't just a story of failure, it's also a story of learning. The unimaginable tragedy over Charki-Dadri directly led to a safer sky for all of us. The lessons learned from that dark evening have been put into practice worldwide, and they have undoubtedly saved thousands and thousands of lives since.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? We've built these incredible automated systems like TCAS to back up the human operators. But as we move towards even more automation, in the cockpit and on the ground, the big challenge remains. How do we best integrate that technology with human skill? How do we make sure that people are always the most reliable, the most resilient part of the safety chain, and not its weakest link?